Welcome to the Voice of Reason, Carolina charm with California wit, whether it's the law, politics, relationships, or recipes for the kitchen. The Voice of Reason is online and in all our hearts. Now, please welcome the Voice of Reason, Mr. Ted Durden.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Voice of Reason. I am your host, Ted Durden. Well, for the last two episodes, I've started off with that familiar, popular children's nursery rhyme, Humpty Dumpty. The only reason I'm not doing it this time is because, well, there is no wall for Humpty Dumpty to sit on. It looks like that Donald Trump, at the end, caved in. Now, there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of comments, a lot of angry Republicans because his staunchly conservative base did not want him to give up anything, let the shutdown remain until the Democrats came to the table and agreed to give him the $5.7 billion that he wanted for that wall. Now, as one of the inducements to have them give him the money that he wanted, he was willing to put DACA back on the table. But even when he presented that option to them, that offer to them, the first thing that came to my mind, and which Nancy Pelosi echoed, why would I give you something permanent in return for getting something temporary? Like I said some time ago, he now has buyer's remorse because at one point the Democrats were willing to give him $25 billion for his wall in exchange for extending DACA protection. But he didn't do that. Now he wants considerably less, and he's still not getting that when he had $25 billion in his hand. But again, at that time, he listened to his conservative base and turned it down. And here we are after a shutdown for 35 days when he could have signed the exact same bill 35 days ago and avoided all of the unnecessary suffering of the 800,000 furloughed federal employees. And again, there's been not a whole lot of talk about the contractors. Now, the Office of Budget Oversight came back and said that during this shutdown, the federal government lost about $11 billion. And again, for what? Now, he signed into law, he passed temporary budget for 3 weeks. So there's been about 1 week that's gone by, so we have 2 more weeks to go. My heart goes out to all those federal employees that came back to work because there's still no guarantee that we won't have another shutdown. Now, Donald Trump has indicated that if he doesn't get the money that he wants from the budget, that he'll declare a national emergency. And if he does do that, he has got to know, and I'm sure his advisors have told him, that there will be constitutional challenges immediately to him doing that. And so any money that he would hope to have access to build that wall will be put on hold. But he may be crazy like a fox, because if he does absolutely nothing, his base will be gone. So at the very least, even if he's playing the role of Don Quixote, tilting at windmills, saber rattling that this is what he is going to do, at least he is showing his base that he is willing to do something, because you have to remember the reason why he was elected, to shake up Washington, to quote unquote drain the swamp, although he didn't really do that, but to do the things that any other American president wouldn't even consider. And again, why is he doing it? Trying to fulfill a campaign promise and also to appeal to his base. Now, the House committee, they've been meeting, Republicans and Democrats, trying to forge some sort of compromise. Whether it will pass in the Senate, possibly, may or may not, remains to be seen. But the one thing that I read recently that I have to agree with 100%, if they can, they really need to keep Donald Trump out of the negotiations. Because one of his issues is the fact that Donald Trump has never heard the word no. And he demonstrated that with his behavior during the negotiations that he had with Nancy Pelosi. He slammed his fist on the table. He stormed out the room. He said on national television for the world, the entire country, to hear, I will gladly shut down the government if I don't get the money for my wall, and I will not blame you for it. I will take ownership of it. Of course, subsequent to that, he tried to back off of it and blamed the Democrats, and it didn't go anywhere. And so, as it stands right now, the House is still saying, Nancy Pelosi is still saying, we're not going to give you any money towards that wall. We'll give you funding for border security, but not one red cent is going to specifically be designated for the building of a wall, a fence, a barrier, a slat, whatever you want to call it. It's not going to happen. Now, those are strong words. And the only way I can see it happening is if Donald Trump and his hardline Republican base comes to the table with something that the Democrats really want, and that is DACA. So Trump's in a tough situation because if he concedes on immigration, again, he's going to alienate a large portion of his base. If he doesn't do something to put into play that wall, he's going to alienate another portion of his base. So the only way out that I do see that he does have is to declare a national emergency and try to gain access, because even if he's not successful, he will demonstrate to his base, look, this is what I'm trying to do. I'd rather try something that I know has little to no chance of prevailing than sit back and do nothing. And I do agree with what I've read and what I've heard from the House and even from some senators. It is best to leave Donald Trump out of the negotiations. And the interesting thing about this entire process is that if Donald Trump does remain adamant about his position, he still may have another out, and that would be the Senate. Because all it takes is a 2/3 majority that would override any presidential veto. So if they garner 60 votes in the Senate, then Donald Trump could not veto any budget that they pass. He can't. He doesn't have the power. The Constitution sees to that. It's about checks and balances. So that may be possibly another out. And when the last time I spoke about Mitch McConnell, wondering why has he been so quiet, Mitch might have been just very, very shrewd. Because again, sitting back and waiting to see how this all plays out. Going into after Trump was elected, McConnell's positions was extremely weakened because he wasn't a big supporter of Donald Trump. He supports him now because he's accomplishing much of the Republican agenda. And so perhaps he was laying in wait, waiting to see if Trump's position and his popularity is weakened. Because if it is, then I can see Mitch McConnell not being bashful or shy or timid or afraid about exerting more influence on the Republican-controlled Senate. Because right now, he's not really trying to anger Donald Trump, because he knows that if he does, and even in the current state that he is in, that Donald Trump has enough support among hard-line conservatives that Mitch McConnell and a lot of the senators could find themselves run out of town during the next election for the House and for the Senate. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the next couple of weeks. one of the other stories I want to talk about, kind of segue into with Donald Trump, was a confrontation that supposedly occurred, between the young gentleman at the Catholic Church who was wearing the Make America Great hat. I think the Indian's name was Nathan Phillips, and the young man, Nick Sandman. Now, it got all blown out of proportion, because what really happened is there were some black Israelites that were at the same memorial, and they saw Nick and his crew wearing the MAGA hats, and they started shouting and yelling expletives at them. And then Nathan Phillips, who happened to be there, decided to step between them and actually sang songs. And all the young boy did was smile at him. Some people took his look to be a leer, to be a sneer, as if he was making fun of Nathan. And nothing could be further from the truth. To me, it's sometimes when the media sees something that happened and they make much ado about nothing. There's been a lot of talk about that hat representing racism. And I want to use that to spring into something else. And I'm going to talk about what I think MAGA means to me personally, but I have a bigger issue regarding racism. And it's America's relationship, specifically Black Americans' relationship with the N-word. I hate the word nigger. I hate the use of that word. I have never used it as part of my vernacular. It's not a part of my everyday conversation. When I see other my black male friends, I don't use that word. I don't say, hey, yo, what's up, my nigga? I don't do that. And it's common amongst my culture. But it's interesting that for decades, our predecessors, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, marched in the streets for equal rights, for equal liberties within this country that brought us here as slaves. And that word was used as an insult and to demean us. And suddenly, it's okay to use that word. There has been an instance, I have two boys, both of them played college football, and they were called that by members of the football team. Now, at the time that it was done, they didn't mean any harm by it, because again, now society makes a distinction between a hard R, like nigger, and A or UH, nigga. There's a difference to them, but it isn't to me. As a general rule, we find that word very offensive. And the one question that I often get from my white counterparts at times when we engage in this discussion, well, why is it okay for you to use it and not us? Well, it's very simple. Because that word, when it is used amongst my people, is one of camaraderie, because there's a common thread. And that common thread is we were enslaved, we were put in chains, our women were raped, sometimes often after having their own children, forced to suckle the children of the white slave owners. They were put in the fields. They were killed, burned, hung, mutilated. They were denied rights for over 200 years. There's a common thread that runs amongst black folk, that as someone of a white race, or of a white race, unless perhaps you're Jewish, cannot even begin to understand. That word is simply offensive when it comes out of your mouth. Now, there are times that even when we use it amongst ourselves, we use it as an insult. It's cutting. It cuts to the bone. And yet it's been popularized in music. And it seems like it's okay. There was even one occasion where there was a Minnesota candidate running for office that used that word as part of his promotional campaign. Now, maybe he did it for shock value. because you know what they say, I'd rather have you talking about me than not saying anything about me. So this is what this gentleman ran. This is his campaign ad. And again, I found it extremely offensive. If I recall correctly, the gentleman's name is Kyle Green. Here we go.
Get the support of voters in Minnesota District 18A, and this is his campaign ad.
Hi, I'm your neighbor Kyle Green. I'm running for District 18A State Representative. I'm not asking for you to vote for me as your leader. I'm asking for you to vote for me as your public servant. The primary duty of a state representative is to protect all the rights of his constituents. I want to be your state representative, I want to be your public servant, and I want to be your nigger.
Whoa.
Now, who in their right mind, as a candidate, as a public figure, want to use that word to promote him getting elected? I found the ad extremely offensive. How the people in Minnesota felt about it, I think a lot of them were shocked and utterly dismayed. Of course, that ad probably fed some racists, some bigots, and probably tickled them to death. I would just like to see that word be taken out of the common vernacular that's used every day in our music, in our language. I'm a gym rat. I'm a 60-year-old gym rat. I go to the gym every day, work out for an hour and a half. And I had an occasion yesterday evening. There was an older gentleman, probably in his mid-50s, and was probably his, I don't know, could have been his son, could have been his grandson, could have been his nephew. And they're talking to each other, and that word is just flying between them like peanut M&Ms. And it just offended me. I so wanted so bad to say something to them, but it wouldn't have done any good. It just wouldn't have, because the group of my people that use that word on a regular basis, they don't think about the impact that it has upon the people that are around them, that it gives them license to use that word. Like I was saying before, I had to have a talk with the coach of my boys' football team and let him know, you need to talk to these boys, because they can't use that word when talking to my children. They can't. They just can't. I was even walking to court one day and heard a white kid say to another white kid, you just a white nigger. I'm like, what? And now that time I did stop and say something to the young man that told him how offensive I thought that word was and need to find another word to describe his friend, because the way in which he was using it was as an insult. It just was. And we just need to take that word back and leave it in the dark where it belongs. And if you want to use that word, if we want to use it amongst friends and family, out of the public eye, out of the view of other races, then fine, do so. There was even an occasion when one of my stepchildren was exposed to that word at a Catholic school by a Belizean who looks black but isn't. And when I was speaking to the bishop about it, who was running the Catholic school, there was a gentleman that stood up behind me and threatened me, because he said he uses that word all the time. And the only thing I told him, I said, if you want to use that word at home amongst your friends, that's fine. But it has no place in the school of learning and academia, and it has no place there. It has no business there. Again, we need to take that word out of the common, everyday vernacular and leave it in the dark where it belongs. We fought too hard to get where we are now. We still have a long way to go. But to allow ourselves to denigrate ourselves by using that word and allow other races through music or jokes to use that word, it makes meaningless all the sacrifices that Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and all those who sat at lunch counters where they weren't welcome, drank out of fountains where they were beaten, hoses were turned on them, dogs were taken to chase them and bite them and maim them. We need to do better. We have to do better. And on that note, we're going to have a quick musical interlude, and then I'll return with a recipe that will have you drooling at the mouth.
You're listening to The Voice of Reason with Ted Durden, brought to you by Turchin Law, 818-230-3110. If you need any assistance with employment, labor, or workers' compensation law, call Turchin Law, 818-230-3110. And if you like The Voice of Reason, please subscribe and tell a friend. Now we go back to The Voice of Reason with host Ted Durden.
To anyone who's been listening to the show, you know I'm a old school Southern man, born out of North Carolina. Have a fondness for meat, potatoes. Of course, as I've gotten older, my palate has grown. But let me tell you something. There is still nothing better than a good steak. There just isn't. One of my favorite recipes when it comes to steak is Steak Diane. It's relatively simple to make, doesn't take a whole lot of time. So without any further ado, but it kicks it up a notch. So let's start with the ingredients. You're going to need a tablespoon of unsalted butter. And you have to remember, when you do a lot of cooking, even with baking, you want to do unsalted sugar. Because, of course, unsalted butter, because salted butter, of course, just adds too much sodium to the recipe, and then it fuses too much of a salty flavor with a lot of the ingredients that you put in. That's why you want to stick with unsalted butter. You're going to need a half a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. Get 3 ounce, 4 of them, 3 ounce beef tenderloin medallions, of course, like round, like filet mignon. And you want to take them, and you can do old school, use a rolling pin, or if you have a tenderizer hammer, you want to pound until it's about a 3/4 inch thick. Now you want to get some kosher salt and freshly ground pepper. Now they have pepper grinders there, not the big tall fancy ones that they sell now. I think Morton sells them now. Well, there's a free plug. So that's what I often use because fresh ingredients are always better. Get a shallot, mince it up, get a clove of garlic, mince it up, get a 1/4 pound of button mushrooms. You want to slice them. You don't want them too thick. You can eyeball it. And so maybe about 1/4 inch. Now, you want to get a 1/4 cup of cognac. Then you want to get 2 tablespoons of Dijon mustard, get a 1/4 cup of heavy cream, a 1/4 cup of veal demi-glace. Now that's something that you can make. I'm not going to get into the details of that aspect of it because that would take too much time to describe how to make that, but I'm sure that's something that you can look up. You want to get 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, a tablespoon of scallion. You want to dice those up real nice, real chop them up, mince them up real good. And then you want to do the same thing with parsley. Now you can get regular parsley, but I always use Italian parsley. It just has a little bit more of a flavor to it. And then you want to get just a little bit of hot sauce. Okay? So here's what you're going to do. First of all, you want to get yourself a pretty large skillet. And you want to melt the butter in the olive oil. While that's doing, you season the meat with the salt and pepper. And then you cook it on a high heat until it's lightly browned on the bottom. That should take no more than about a minute because remember, you've pounded it out to a 3/4 inch thickness, which isn't that thick. Then you're going to turn the medallions over, the steak, of course, cook them for another 45 seconds on the other side. Now, what you then want to do is take that meat, set it to the side in tinfoil and wrap it because anybody knows that when you take steak or off the grill or off heat, it still continues to cook. So that's why you want to wrap it up in the foil that keeps it tender and keeps the juices locked in. Now, in that pan, you're going to take and add the shallot and the garlic and cook that over moderate heat. And, keep stirring it until you can smell it when it becomes really fragrant. And that should take, I don't know, give or take. You don't have to put a timer on. If you have one on your microwave, you can do that, or your watch. It's going to be about 20 seconds or so. At that point, once it becomes fragrant, you're going to add the mushrooms, season it with the kosher salt and the cracked pepper. Again, use the fresh pepper grounds. And you're going to cook that until the mushrooms are soft. And again, you don't want to overcook it. You don't want to burn them because mushrooms don't take that long. So we're talking about maybe 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. Once that's done, take it off the heat. Let it set for a minute. Then you want to take the cognac. Remember, that's a 1/4 cup. And then you want to add that to it. Here's the fun part. Light it. Now, you're not blending it in. You're going to pour the cognac in it and put a match to it. And so just let it burn down. What that does, it singes the mushroom, and it adds a certain flavor to all the other ingredients, to the shallots, to the garlic. That's why you do that. Now, once the flames die down, then you're going to take and add the Dijon mustard and the cream, pour that in it, and stir it over medium heat, again, for about 1 minute. Now, if you've taken the time and you've made your veal demi-glace, after you've stirred it for 1 minute, then you're going to whisk in the veal demi-glace, add in the Worcestershire sauce, the scallions, the parsley, and then season it with the rest of the salt and pepper and the hot sauce. Now, while all that's done, that's when you take your tenderloins, take them out of the foil, and you put them into the pan with all of these ingredients. Now, this is crucial. This is important now. And anybody that knows anything about collard greens, it's almost like that. When you save collard greens, you don't throw away the pot liquor. So what you do is that juice that's in that foil, you pour it into the saucepan as well. That's what you do. And then you simmer that for about 1 minute or so. And then once that is done, then you go ahead and you plate your meal. Now, with that, as you often know, as far as vegetables are concerned, you can pair that with some sauteed spinach. I'm a huge mushroom fan. I'll saute it with some spinach, some mushrooms, throw some shallots and some garlic in that, and maybe have some mashed potatoes on the side. Season that with some Italian parsley. And again, great meal comes together. If you want to add some garlic bread to it to round it out. And again, a perfect pairing for this meal is a Cabernet Sauvignon. Oh my God, I'm hungry already. I might have to go home and make this for dinner tonight. You make this for yourself or you make it for a loved one. Food porn. You know what's going to happen next. Again, you cook like the way I've been describing with these recipes. Whoever you with, he, she, you ain't going nowhere. They going to keep you for life. You cook like this. You pair your wines like this. Well, this brings us to the end of another episode of The Voice of Reason. It has been my absolute pleasure sharing this evening with you. So I look forward to you tuning in in the next couple of weeks where we'll have further discussion about American politics and relationship trends. And remember, relationship trends doesn't always have to be about between a man and a woman. It could be just about anything. I have been your host, Ted Durden. Please be sure to tune in for another edition of The Voice of Reason. And remember, ignorance only prevails when rational people sit back and do nothing.
You've been listening to The Voice of Reason, hosted by Mr. Ted Durden. The Voice of Reason is produced and directed by Appellant Associates and is part of the WorkCompMatters.org podcast channel. All opinions expressed on The Voice of Reason are the sole opinions of Mr. Ted Durden and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of his advertisers or the Work Comp Matters channel. For the Voice of Reason, my name is Steve Appel.